Going to be a presentation about part of a solo flight I made around the world in 2019, specifically the sections through China and Central Asia. This is my plane. It's a 2001 Lancair Columbia 300, which I bought in 2010 with about 288 hours on it, so practically new. But it was one of their first production models, serial number 22. I'm not going to go through any of these kinds of details. You can look at my webpage later if you want to pick those up. The major upgrades I did were the avionics and also adding the TKS de-icing system you see here. I did that in preparation for my flight to Antarctica. This is the panel, traditional panel, or I guess you call it old-fashioned these days. The only thing that's unusual is the ICOM 706 HF radio that I've got in the radio stack here. I wired that in as COM3 to the audio panel. And it worked pretty well, but I haven't used it in many years, so I'd be surprised if it still worked. And of course, with the side stick, it gives you a roomier cabin. The auxiliary fuel tank, I'll take this on any of these long international flights. This one I designed myself to fit my plane, and I had it custom built down in Tracy, California. And on this particular flight, I could have gotten away without it. I could have picked flight legs that were short enough that I wouldn't need that. But I believe in this axiom that more fuel equals more options equals less risk. So I'll take it when I can. So these are the major flights I've done since 2011. The red line is my first round the world flight that went across the Pacific and back to the US. Then in 2013 and 14, I flew south to Antarctica. And then in 2018, I did a flight over the North Pole around Europe and then back to the US. And finally, in 2019, this flight around the world westbound, which stayed in the Northern Hemisphere. Well, this is a book I published in 2015 that talks about the flights, the first flight around the world and the flight down to Antarctica. I want to spend a few minutes talking about this flight over the North Pole, a few slides, because it wasn't in the book. So I did this in July 16th, actually, of 2018, from Resolute in northern Canada to the North Pole and then south to Longyearbyen, so about 1,630 miles total. And some scenes of the broken Arctic ice that you cross as you fly to the pole. And of course, you've got sunshine of 24 hours a day at that latitude. This is one of my favorite little videos. It shows the GPS in my plane ticking up to 90 degrees north latitude, the North Pole, and then south again. So you can see the latitude here. It'll just flash on for a second. I was warned before I made this flight that the GPS at the North Pole might be inconsistent, but as you can see, I've got 12 strong signals here, so there was no issue with that. And arriving in Longyearbyen, some spectacular mountains coming in from the north, and of course, final approach at Longyearbyen Airport. So now on to the subject at hand. What I'm going to talk about is starting up in Nome, Alaska and going through to Istanbul. And I'm going to start up here in Siberia because I know some people there have ambitions to fly through Siberia when it becomes politically feasible to do that. Okay, so the only tricky thing about flying from Nome to Anadyr is getting your timing right because they have limited opening hours at Anadyr. So you need to write down your numbers and figure it out. It's not that long a flight, but that could be one mistake that's possible. And some shots here, nice day, Seward Peninsula, Alaska. That was my last view of the US for a while. And then flying into Russia and seeing the snow-covered hills and mountains. Anadyr itself, hazy day. Here's the runway, parked on the ramp. The Gendex, I print up a bunch of these things before I go on a flight because all of the information about your passport number and all the rest are the same. And so I usually take 150, 200 of these things and I print them up on A4 paper. And so all I have to do when I get someplace is fill in the departure airport, the arrival airport, the date, and sign it. And there's been places where I've flown where they wanted 6 copies of this thing. And so if you got them all filled out already, it makes it easy to furnish that. Anadir, the airport is here across the river from the town. So in the summer, you've got open water, so you can go back and forth on a boat. In the winter, they have an ice road, so you drive back and forth. But in between times, and this was early June, the ice is broken up, so they have these little hovercraft that they use to get back and forth between the airport and the town. This is Anadir itself. Really not too interesting. I guess their one tourist attraction, perhaps, is this cathedral that's entirely made of wood. On to Magadan, longer flight, but I'm happy to be moving south for warmer temperatures. And looking at the ice-filled water that transitions to open water along the way. Had to work around some high cloud layers here. I think it was at 14,000 feet. So Magadan, I'm showing you the approach plate just to illustrate that at the time, at least, they were using QFE, and you could, which is, barometer setting based on the elevation of the airport. So if you use that, your altimeter will read 0 when you're sitting on the runway. QNH on request. Well, they gave me QNH without me asking for it. But the thing I wanted to point out is how cluttered the approach plate gets when they have all these conversion tables between QNH and QFE. And even something like this, where you have, transition point altitudes, and if you had this on your lap and you glance down, you could easily pick up the wrong number. So as I'm sure some of you have done, I made my own little sketch of the approach on my knee pad that had the essence of what the approach was. And basically came in along the south here and made these turns onto the localizer. I understand a couple of years ago, the Russians dropped using QFE. And so the only people that do that now, I think, are air show pilots that set their altimeters to 0 when they're ready to take off because they need to know where the ground is specifically. Okay, well, this is a runway at Magadan, and you can see the hills surrounding it. So it is down in the valley at 500 feet. So that's sort of the situation there. On the ramp at Magadan, this was a refueling stop for me. I didn't load any fuel in Anadir. So refueling, this is Anastasia. She worked for the handler there, so I talked her into helping fill my plane with fuel. And this rotary pump I've always carried since my first round the world flight. And it's made of polypropylene, so it's not that heavy. It weighs less than 5 pounds. And I did it because of this situation. This is in Nagpur, India, in my 2011 flight. And I saw this in India, Bangladesh, and I think 1 or 2 other places where they used a siphon to get fuel out of a barrel, put it into the bucket into the funnel into my wing. And obviously it's going to be a slow process. And I know some of you have certainly seen the same thing before. But I also use this rotary pump in Antarctica, or on my way to Antarctica. This was in Puerto Williams in Tierra del Fuego. And for this particular flight, I didn't have the ferry tank connected to the fuel system. I was basically carrying fuel as cargo, really to avoid FAA paperwork. But the rotary pump fits into the ferry tank, given the gull wing doors on the Lancer, so I can basically pump fuel out of the ferry tank into my own wing. Or if I was playing the role of tanker, I could fuel somebody else's plane for that matter. Okay, Magadan on to Yuzhno. Happy to be moving south. This stretch of water here, they gave me HF and VHF frequencies, but I tried them and could never hear anybody, so I was out of radio contact for a few hours in that section. Once on land again, I was able to get people on VHF. A murky IMC departure from Magadan. I forget, this was at Magadan too, I think, as it cleared up a bit. And going south, really not too much interesting to take a photograph of. This is the runway at Yuzhno. And on the ramp, you can see they've got construction cranes, so they were doing a bunch of work to upgrade the terminal there. And of course, more fuel for this loaded here because I knew my next stop in Japan, there wouldn't be any avgas. And from Yuzhno on to Chitose, a short flight, but again, no avgas in Chitose, at least at the time. What I remember most about that flight is when I got close to Chitose and was descending, there was a bunch of evil weather here, so it was a very bumpy descent. This is the runway at Chitose and on the ramp there. So Chitose down to Kyushu, Japan is bigger than I thought, actually. I expected that to be more like a 500-mile flight without really researching it, but it is what it is. So they have fuel in Kyushu. You can see the fueling truck here. And the runway, the airport is actually built on an artificial island, which you can see here, and the runway is up here. And of course, it's a pretty built up town. And that's basically where I was waiting to get my clearance to fly into China. So let's talk about China. So my ambition was to fly along the Silk Road, which you can sort of see here, but you know, there's lots of pieces to it, and you can look online and find other maps that sort of look like this. And you know, it's generally east to west, of course, and the places I wanted to see specifically were Jiuguan, Dunhuang, Turpan, and Kashgar, and all in basically Western China. I guess these are sort of in central China. So that was the idea, and also I wanted to continue through Uzbekistan, Samarkand, Bukhara, those places, and didn't really get to do all of that. So let's talk about the arrangements. So my initial contact in early 2019 was Claire at AOPA China, and in talking to her, trading dozens and dozens of emails, she kept referring to her technical team. And our technical team was basically Mainline Flight Services, which is a well-established handling company for private flights in China, mainly corporate and private jet flights like that. But they were the ones that actually arranged all the flight permits, arranged fuel, arranged everything. The total cost for 2 stops at that I'll show you when I get to that map was $22,800, and that was all inclusive. It included airport landing fees, en route permits, avgas, handlers, everything. So there was just one number for the whole package. And I never saw the breakdown of what the total cost was, but I suspect most of it was airport landing fees. I think I was charged the same thing that they would charge to a small private jet. And at one point I considered a third airport, and it would have kicked the cost up to around $34,000. So at the time I figured it was about $11,000 per airport. Where could I fly? So Claire told me about a bunch of GA airports, runways that they'd built across the country, and they were so new that they didn't even have airport codes. But they also didn't have any support services for GA flights or English-speaking personnel. And she kept telling me about these places, and I said, Claire, you know, I really can't use this if it doesn't have English-speaking personnel. And there's one in particular at Dunhuang, a place I wanted to visit, that only had a 600-meter runway, and it's at about 4,000 feet in a hot, dry desert. So it would have been impossible for me to use. And even a 600-meter runway at sea level is something I really couldn't make use of. The Lancer has poor short field performance. And so even 600 meters at sea level is a little bit tenuous. And these airports, it seemed odd to me they were building these things. I said, who do they expect to use them? There just isn't a big GA community to use these short runways in China. And for those of you who have been to China, you know that they tend to build things without really identifying an audience to use them. So they've got, you know, apartment tower blocks that are empty. They've got storefront that are empty. They've got neighborhoods, whole neighborhoods that with nobody in them. And it seems to me this construction of these GA airports were sort of following along that same philosophy. So as a practical matter, I was restricted to using the commercial airports with English-speaking controllers. military situation in Western China. As most of you know, the Han Chinese have been brutally repressing the Muslim population there, the Uyghurs. And I made my best case for getting permission to fly through Western China, but after working on it for months and having Claire and mainline flight services and those people try to get permission, it just wasn't going to happen. So I finally gave up on that and decided to take an alternate route. And so this is what actually happened. So I flew into Yantai here to Hohat, and then I wanted to go across this route as I described before. But what I had to do instead was to go back north through Russia, into Russia, then westbound through Russia, and then south to Kazakhstan. In flying from Japan to China, the MEAs along the FIR boundary between the two countries are all higher than I could fly, flight level 240. And so I had to look for a lower altitude to cross over, and that happened to be between South Korea and China at this place, which was 16,000 feet. So in fact, to get to China, I had to fly over South Korea and then westbound into Yantai. So these are just a few photos arriving in China. The odd thing about this was that I kept asking for lower, and they kept me at 16,000 feet until I was like 25 miles from the airport. And it just illustrated to me that they really didn't understand the limitations of small unpressurized aircraft. Because descending that far, this airport's at sea level, basically. Descending that far in that short a time is really hard on your ears. The plane could handle it. I've got speed brakes, so the plane is not the issue. But it is hard on your ears, so I actually ended up doing some 360-degree turns, even though I was on an IFR flight plan, until I finally joined the localizer to land at Yantai. On the ramp at Yantai, it's a brand new airport. I felt like I didn't need to mess up the concrete. This is Claire from AOPA, and she came down to Yantai to greet me. These are two of the guys that I worked with at Mainline. This is Freddie and this is Leo. And as I said, those are the guys that actually were doing the technical work for flight permits and so forth. So onward from there, I spent one night in Yantai, onward to Hohat. It turns out I don't have any photographs at all for that particular flight leg. There just wasn't anything interesting to photograph, or I remember it being a very cloudy, bumpy flight. But I landed in Hohat, refueled the plane. I left it parked there for 2 weeks and got on commercial flights because I still wanted to see all of these places. And so that was my process. So this is Jiaguan, and this is actually where the Great Wall of China begins. It's on this river, and this is the remnants of an old tower where the wall actually started. On to Dongguan here. And I was on commercial tours that I booked for these places. So this was an old fort. This is much more oriented towards what's on the Silk Road. Remnants of walls where they actually had storehouses for goods that were moving along the Silk Road. So on to Turpan. And this is a pretty interesting place built in the 1st century BCE. And German and European archaeologists were the first ones to excavate this site, and they took a lot of what they found, the ancient artifacts, manuscripts, artwork, they took it all back to Germany or Europe with them. And normally you say, well, they looted the country, but in this case it turned out to be a good thing because during the Cultural Revolution in China in the late 1960s, the Red Guard went around and systematically destroyed a lot of this stuff. They destroyed manuscripts, artwork, anything that was old. So the fact that they were taken away to Europe is what actually saved them. So Turpan on to Kashgar. So Kashgar you can think of as sort of the capital of Uyghur Nation, but this is the last remaining mosque in China, and it may be gone by now, but even the artwork and so forth had been stripped out of it. If you want snake for lunch, there you go. And the famous Sunday livestock market at Kashgar. I guess it's famous, at least it's famous in Kashgar. and from Kashgar back to Hohhot to resume my flight. And that's where things got really interesting. This is me parked sideways on the taxiway. So I did a pre-flight on the plane. Everything was fine. Started taxiing out, and I couldn't keep directional control. The plane veered off to the right. There was no way to straighten it out, so I ended up parked sideways. Called the tower, told them I thought I had a flat tire, and they freaked out. They freaked out even more when I shut down the engine and climbed out of the plane. And Hohhot is a reasonably busy regional airport. So they had a lot of traffic leaving in the morning, and they had to put a ground stop on it because I was blocking the taxiway. And so they were very anxious to get my plane out of the way, and they didn't have any equipment at all to lift up the flat tire, to tow the thing back to the parking stand. None of that. At least they couldn't figure that out. Um, so the decision was made to push the plane onto the grass alongside the taxiway. Not my decision, but that's what happened. So that's sort of what this looked like. They got people from the airport, fire department, etc. This is even more interesting. This is Claire right there. She came to Ho Hot to see me off. So that's a pretty rare video to see your plane being dragged across the grass in China. So they were able to get a set of tires. In fact, I only needed one, but they sent a whole set of tires and tubes up to Ho Hot from someplace in China, and they arrived late that night. But the real delay came as a result of my own poor planning. I didn't have the jack pads with me. They're small, they weigh nothing. I could have always had them on board. I should have, but I didn't have them. And so, as I was standing out there on the grass, I called my mechanic at Bremerton Airport, Keith, and asked him to go down to my hangar into a cabinet, grab the jack pads, and FedEx them to me, which he did. But it still took like 5 or 6 days to get them because they got hung up in Chinese customs. This is Michael. I asked for an FAA licensed mechanic to actually do the work on the plane. I didn't need him to sign anything, but I wanted that level of experience. And he trained in the United States, spoke great English. He hadn't worked on any planes as small as mine in China, mostly light jets, but he was the right guy to have doing this work. And since I was in and out of security so often, they issued me my own ID badge. And I really have no idea what it says here. It may say shoot on sight for all I know. The airport was definitely not happy with me being there. They wanted me gone. So the plane was full of fuel. You try and jack up the front edge of the wing. All you're going to do is raise the nose. So I piled heavy stuff out of the plane on the cowling, tried to stake down the front gear, and finally we found a scrap piece of wood laying around on the grass that we used as a crutch under the tail. And the combination of those three things, we finally got the wheel off the ground. So here's what we're looking at, Michael. I actually have the maintenance manuals and parts manuals for my plane on my iPad. So we had all the drawings we needed to dig into this. And this is what we found. There was this 1 inch split in the tube. So it wasn't a puncture, it was just a stress failure of some kind in the rubber. Uh, anyway, it made me suspicious of the other tires. Anyway, we got it all back together late at night, 11, 12 o'clock. And the airport said I could have the taxiway for 30 minutes, beginning at 5 a.m. through 5:30. And I told them, well, okay, but I'm not going to taxi it off the grass because there was a bunch of stones and stuff out there and I didn't want to risk nicking the prop. So I said, I need a bunch of people out there to push the plane back onto the taxiway. And when I got there at 5 a.m., they were there. I don't know who these guys are. They're not airport people. It might be some kind of military cadets or something. They were all wearing camouflage pants. So pushed it back onto the taxiway. It started to ride up. Michael was in a follow me car, led me back to the parking stand. I did some S turns on the taxiway going back. to make sure the brakes and everything else were working correctly. And there we are in the early morning. You can see the long shadows there, plane back on its feet. So that's the saga of the flat tire in Hohhot. And from Hohhot on to Ulan-Ude in Russia, across Mongolia. This was not too interesting a flight. Hazy weather. This is Ulaanbaatar actually in the haze. Ulaanbaatar is the capital of Mongolia. This was a new international airport they were building. I don't think it was in operation at that time. A river between Russia and Mongolia. But I did visit Mongolia in 2018, right after the Earthrounders reunion in China, because I really wanted to see the Gobi Desert. So I took some commercial flights to get up there. So you've got sand, you've got these windswept cliffs, and this is actually a canyon in the Gobi Desert, and this is ice. So this is in the height of summer, and you've still got ice in the Gobi Desert. Ulan-Ude, it's on the Trans-Siberian Railroad, so they've got some tourist infrastructure there, but again, not too attractive a place. This apparently is the largest Lenin head in captivity, so I guess that's notable. Anyway, refueling here, ready for the next flight on to Krasnoyarsk. Oops. So I actually planned this route because there was some bad weather forecast in here and across Lake Baikal and on to Krasnoyarsk. This is Lake Baikal here. The storm that was forecast did materialize, so I had to work my way around these lightning strikes. This is the only GA airport I went to in Russia, at Krasnoyarsk, and this was recommended to me by Evgeny at Mac, and this is where the avgas was, and the commercial airport was 7 miles away, but no avgas. So when I got handed off by the en route controller to their frequency, I called them up and reported 10 miles out, and I got a reply in Russian, which I didn't understand. And then I reported base and final, same thing, got replies in Russia that I didn't understand. And so you sort of get back to fundamentals and say, okay, well, there's an open runway and there's no plane sitting on it, so I'm going to land there. And that's what I did. They had a nice fueling setup at this airport. As I say, it's a real GA airport designed for that purpose. I like Krasnoyarsk. It was I booked a hotel right downtown in the center of things, which I always like to do. And they've got a river there. They had stuff built on the banks of the river for having musical presentations, things of that sort. A pretty place. And this is a Russian journalist who heard that I was in town passing through and wanted to interview me, which was fine with me. Wrote a nice article that was in Russian. I translated a couple of paragraphs of it, but with Google Translate. The benefit of this was that I said, could you pick me up at my hotel? Because I don't think I could have told a taxi driver how to get back to the airport. So this guy knew. And so that was a benefit to having him. So my next flight leg was to Barnaul, and I needed to clear out of Russia to get in to go to Kazakhstan. And I could have done that at the commercial airport at Krasnoyarsk, but it was only 7 miles away, and I had the plane full of fuel, and I didn't want to risk an overweight landing. And so I want to burn off some fuel, and I particularly didn't want to risk the overweight landing because now I was uncertain about the quality of my tires and tubes. So I decided to clear out of Russia at Barnaul, which is about 400 miles away, and burn off some fuel in the process. On the way to Barnaul, I ended up flying through some cold, icy clouds, and it's really the only time on this flight that I used the TKS de-icing. Maybe you can see the wet wing here, and just a bead of ice left on the leading edge of the wing. You almost have to anticipate using this system, anticipate the ice, because it takes a while for it to build up for the pump. When you flip the pump on, it takes a while to build up pressure behind the panels to push the fluid out through the little holes. And it's sort of a race between that and how fast the ice builds up. And usually the ice can build up faster than the pump builds pressure. So you may not, eventually it'll get rid of all the ice, but it may not be as fast as you like. So Barnaul, nice airport, beautiful farm country. Sort of surprised to see that, but yeah, really a pretty nice place. And en route to Almaty in Kazakhstan, former capital, across a lot of strange terrain like this, countryside that I don't recall seeing this anywhere else I've flown in the world. Final approach into the international airport there to clear into Kazakhstan through immigration and customs. This is the international airport. And once I'd cleared in, I had to take off again and fly across town to the GA airport over here. So that's the runway. And it's a Borle day, I guess. And that's where the avgas is. That's where there's a flight school and, excuse me, GA facilities over there. So this is at that airport because the flight school is here. They had a pump to refuel me, and the Antonov AN2. I saw a lot of these planes parked in various places. Excuse me. Yeah, the Russians built thousands of these things, and other countries did as well. So it's a versatile utility plane. I don't know much else about it. I stayed in Almaty for 4 or 5 days, and while the plane was parked, I took a side trip to Bishkek. So you may recognize some of this stuff from your visits there already. I like to go into the shops in foreign cities like this to see what's for sale and sort of get a sense of the day-to-day life of the people that live there. And on to Adaro, which is at the north end of the Caspian Sea. I made one stop in Shymkent because I initially thought there were some interesting things to see there from the Silk Road. But it turns out those were sort of oversold, so I only stayed one night there and then flew on. But you can see I avoided Uzbekistan, and as I said initially, I really wanted to fly there. But when I asked Evgeny Kabanov about it at the time, he said even for them it was terra incognita, exactly the words he used. They didn't know how to fly to Uzbekistan. And I said, well, if they don't know how to fly, I'm not going to figure it out. So I sort of gave up on it. In retrospect, I wish I had pushed on it harder and found some other way to do it. But I was already behind schedule in any event because of the flat tire and Hohhot. So one day out to Shymkent, spent the night there, and then on to Adaro. And on the airway I was flying, I was close to Baikonur, which is the cosmodrome where the Russians launched their Soyuz and all that capsules and all of their rockets. I think they're building another cosmodrome someplace, but this one is still in operation. So I asked the en route controller. I was talking to if I could get permission to overfly the cosmodrome, and he told me no. I wasn't chartered as restricted airspace, but you get the same response, I think, if you try to fly over rocket facilities like that in the U.S. En route to Adaro, still, oddball terrain. It was all sort of interesting. This may be dried salt flats here. I'm really not sure. But I don't know. I thought it was kind of interesting to see this. Adaro is probably the ugliest airport I've ever been to. It looked like it was a big time airport at one time. There was a lot of these derelict buildings that were no longer in use and just junk laying around. I picked up a barrel of avgas in Adaro, and the guy there basically had to lead me back to the terminal through a maze of these old buildings. And I think I took this photograph just to remind myself how to get back to my plane. So from Adaro, I cleared out of Kazakhstan and onto Krasnodar in Russia. So into Russia for the third time, and I actually had sort of a rare thing, I guess. I had a multi-entry visa for Russia that was good for 3 years, and I don't think such a thing, given the political situation, such a thing would be possible now, but it was at the time. And I really wanted to fly to Sochi. I guess this is Sochi in Russian. I'm not sure. But anyway, Evgeny advised me not to do that because Putin has a summer home there, and he would go down there at unexpectedly at random times. And if I was there when he arrived, I'd be pinned down. I couldn't leave until he left. And so it was risky to try and fly in there. So he suggested Krasnodar instead, and there was avgas there. So en route to Krasnodar, again, nothing too interesting to see. I can't remember much about that flight. Parked on the ramp there. They had sort of a complicated refueling pump. They kept track of temperature, so I think they were trying to sell fuel by weight instead of volume. I still wanted to go down to the Black Sea coast, so I jumped on a train. It was just a 2 hour train ride down to this place, sort of a holiday place on the Black Sea, Novorossiysk. And of course, I had to dip my feet in the Black Sea. There's, marina for pleasure boats, some sailboats, a beach, that kind of stuff. So, it's an okay place. I spent a couple of nights there. So from Krasnodar on to Istanbul, and basically going across the Black Sea southbound. And I sort of started ignoring the MEAs here. I think it was at 16,000 feet, but I just filed for 12,000 and flew that. And let's see, I guess this is leaving Krasnodar. This is the airport at Ankara in Turkey. And this is coming into Sherlu. So I didn't fly to Istanbul itself, I flew to Sherlu. And this is the runway here, and that's where the avgas was. At the time, they had just opened a new international airport in Istanbul, and the old international airport was being converted to general aviation use. But at the time, they still didn't have avgas available there, so that's why I went in here. And it's a long distance. It's a distance from Istanbul out to this airport. And I hired a car service, and I think it cost 100 euros each way to get from the airport to my hotel in downtown Istanbul. But again, as I said before, I like to stay in the hotels in the center of things so I can get out and walk around and see the main sites. And of course, Hagia Sophia, just a short walk from my hotel. Uh, I'm sure a lot of you have seen this before, the amazing tile work and mosaics in these places. And it's been alternately a church and a mosque and maybe some other things as well over the centuries. So it's sort of an odd mix of different artwork. I really like pictures like this, where you see a corridor that was built of rough stone, but over the centuries, the stones have been worn smooth by the passage of 1 million feet. And to me, this sort of, you know, captures the transition of history to see how that has been worn down over so many years. A few other shots around Istanbul, Grand Bazaar, of course, everybody's got to wander around there. Didn't buy anything. And then I took a boat ride out on the Bosporus here. That was okay, I guess. There's some different things to see on the other side from the center of Istanbul. Go back. So from Istanbul, I just meandered my way across Europe, stopping in some places that I hadn't been before. Bulgaria, Romania, Slovakia, actually Ireland. All the traveling I've done, I've never been to Ireland before. Then flew up to through Scotland to Iceland, and then long flight from Reykjavik across to Iqaluit across Greenland, and then on to Churchill and back in the United States and home. So overall, not that long around the world flight, a little over 18,000 nautical miles, 121 flight hours. But it was long enough to qualify for a circumnavigator diploma. So this is my second one. I have one for my eastbound flight in 2011. So that was the flight in 2019, and 2020 I decided to change direction, and I'll spend a few minutes talking about what I've been doing most recently. So the new mission I set for myself in 2020 was a solo voyage to all 7 continents. And I'd really had the idea 5 years before when I was writing the book about flying, and dismissed it at the time because it was, I considered it too difficult, too time consuming, not for me. But I resurrected the idea in 2020 for two reasons. Number one is I'd done all the long international flights I wanted to do, and I felt satisfied with what I'd accomplished on that front. And the second reason was it was a pandemic year. And like a lot of people, I was sitting around doing nothing, trying to think of something new to get engaged with. And so I resurrected this idea of sailing. I ordered the boat from Allures. It's a company in Cherbourg, France. And they promised to build it in a year, but it took them 18 months to deliver it. So I'm going to show you just one thing from the voyage. And this is a drone video I took in near Direction Island in Cocos Keeling Atoll, which is in the middle of the Indian Ocean. And as the video starts, you can see this guy Dave, Australian guy with his wooden ketch that he rebuilt himself. You can see him taking his dinghy ashore here. And this is actually a 360-degree panorama. And so you can sort of see what an atoll like this looks like. Start it here. This is my boat here. This is Flywave. So you probably noticed some birds going through the shot. Fortunately, they didn't try and mate with the drones, so that would have been a mess. These black spots here are actually dead coral heads, so they're as hard as rock. And so if you try and drop your anchor on one of those, it's not going to bite. So you need to look for patches of sand like this to anchor. And this is the whole voyage, which I completed in January of this year. So leaving Norfolk, Virginia in August of 2022, then over to Europe, touched Africa at Tangiers, down to South America, Antarctica in January 2023, then across the Pacific to Australia, the fifth continent, then to Indonesia for the Asia landing, then around the southern tip of Africa, back across the Atlantic for the third time to Florida and the completion of my voyage. About 38,000 nautical miles total, roughly 350 days at sea. This is one of my favorite slides because it sort of captures all the adventure I've had for the last 14 years, sort of bookends it. Seeing my plane, a photo of my plane parked in Antarctica and the boat anchored in Antarctica. So with the completion of my solo voyage to all seven continents on January 29th of this year, I became the first person in history to both fly and sail solo to all the continents. So this is sort of a bold claim, and I'll explain it. First person to sail around the world was Joshua Slocum in 1898, and of course, solo around the world. And of course, he didn't go to Antarctica. But since then, there's been many, many solo sailors out there crossing the oceans, racing around the world. There's races every year for solo sailors that are nonstop, unassisted races around the world. So there's a lot of sailors out there doing things, and there's really no official records. There's no way for me to know what solo sailors have done. Maybe there's been others that have landed on all seven continents as well. But I do know the few solo pilots that have landed on all the continents. And I don't know them personally. I know who they are. And none of them are offshore sailors. None of them are sailing across the oceans that I'm aware of. So it's primarily for that reason I feel justified in this claim that I'm the first one to do both things. This is what I'm currently working on, a book about the voyage. I expect it to be out in 2025. I've got a mock-up of the cover. Now I just have to write all the pages that go behind the cover. Actually, it's quite far along. It's like 60% finished, so I expect the first draft to be done by the end of June. This is my website, flywave.com. I'm also have a YouTube channel, which if you just search for Flywave, you can find it. There's a section on flying with a lot of details about the planes and maps and links to videos. The sailing section as well, a lot of information about the boat. There's a detailed track that shows everywhere my boat went during those 2.5 years, and some other things that I've done over the years. So check it out if you're interested in that. And that's the end of my presentation. So thanks for your attention, and I'd be happy to take questions.